Why was the letter ever unsealed? That question lingered like a shadow over every page, every rumor, every whisper that trickled through the halls of Fort Redstone. It had been sealed for more than a decade, buried in a vault nobody touched, a dossier without headings, without ceremony, only one name pressed in faded ink: Iron Wolf. No one knew who it belonged to. No one asked. And when it finally resurfaced, nothing remained the same. The dawn over Fort Redstone carried a chill that cut deeper than most mornings. It wasn't the kind of cold you measured with a thermometer. It was the kind that crawled beneath your skin, weighing down each breath until silence itself felt heavier. This was where Marine leaders were forged, where failure wasn't simply punished, it was erased. Sarah Whitaker stood at the far edge of the yard, motionless, hands locked behind her back, eyes forward. She was in her late 20s, her presence quiet, almost too quiet for a place like this. Her boots were polished to mirrored perfection, her uniform crisp, her stance sharp. But perfection did little to shield her from the judgment that bled through the air. Whispers drifted around her like smoke. "What's she even doing here?" one voice muttered. "Probably begged for entry," another scoffed. A third voice, low but cutting, sneered, "Medics don't belong in command school." Sarah's jaw tightened, though she didn't move. She absorbed every word, every chuckle, every sly glance. Not with defiance, not with anger, but with silence. The kind of silence that unsettles people more than words ever could. Then came Lieutenant Blake Morgan, 26, arrogant by nature, not nurture. He walked like the world bent around him, like command wasn't earned but preordained. He stopped just short of her, his smirk sharp enough to cut. "Transfer?" he asked, loud enough for others to hear. "Sergeant Whitaker," she replied, steady, her eyes never shifting. "Not here." He leaned in closer, his voice laced with mockery. "Here, you're just another cadet trying to keep up." The group behind him chuckled. One of them muttered something about medics playing soldier. Another joked that she'd wash out before the month ended. Sarah didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't let them see anything, because she had learned long ago, when the noise is loudest, it often means nothing worth hearing. By nightfall, the whispers turned into open laughter. In the locker room, Morgan reenacted the exchange for an eager audience, mimicking Sarah's calm correction in a shrill voice. "Sergeant Whitaker," he mocked, sending the room into howls of laughter. "Bet she can't even strip a rifle without Googling it." At the far end, Sarah unlaced her boots, deliberate, unhurried. Her stillness was its own form of defiance, but someone else noticed what the others missed. Corporal Nenataus, observant, quiet, sharper than most gave her credit for, watched as Sarah folded her uniform with meticulous care. That's when it happened. A small, worn patch slipped out of Sarah's locker and landed on the floor. Nena bent quickly, picking it up before anyone else saw. Her eyes locked on the faded stitching, "Iron Wolf Unit." Her breath caught. She had heard those words before, not in full detail, but in fragments of hushed conversations at late briefings. A name that wasn't supposed to exist. Carefully, she slipped the patch back to Sarah without a word. Sarah took it, tucked it away, locked the door, and left without so much as a glance back. 2 weeks dragged on. The mocking didn't stop. If anything, it sharpened. During a morning drill, Morgan's voice rang across the field. "Careful out there, Whitaker. Wouldn't want those medic hands bruised." His laughter carried like a command, pulling others with it. Sarah ignored him, but Nena noticed something. Sarah's eyes weren't on Morgan. They weren't even on the drill. They kept flicking upward, scanning the ridgeline above the training course. A glance so brief most would miss it, but Nena caught it. That evening, when the others crowded into the mess hall, Sarah walked the perimeter alone. Gravel crunched under her boots as she traced the fence line, pausing near the trees. Her gaze fixed on a camera high above, its red light flickering for just under 2 seconds. Almost nothing, almost invisible, but not to her. She pulled a small notebook from her pocket, scribbled something down, then slipped it back and moved on. Later in the strategy room, the cadets gathered for a briefing. The lights dimmed. The projector hummed. Morgan lounged at the front like he owned the place. But then the screen froze mid-presentation. A chime echoed through the room. The instructor frowned, tapping the console. A new prompt appeared. Restricted access. Authorization code, Iron Wolf 1. A ripple of unease swept the hall. Whispers buzzed like hornets. The instructor tried to override the system. Nothing. The screen refused to move. At the back of the room, Sarah's tablet buzzed. She glanced down, a new message. No sender, no subject, just 4 words. Iron Wolf, stand by. Her hand froze midair. Her chest tightened. Nena, seated nearby, caught the faint glow of the message on Sarah's screen. Her eyes widened. She didn't understand what it meant, not entirely. But she understood enough. Sarah Whitaker was not who they thought she was. That night, Sarah sat cross-legged on her bunk, the notebook open in her lap. Lines of numbers filled the pages, coordinates, times, odd patterns. Things no one else noticed, or maybe no one else cared to. She turned to the latest entry, her pen lingering over the words she had just written. Iron Wolf 1, authorization active. She closed the notebook and slid it beneath her pillow. Outside, wind rattled the barracks windows. Inside a sealed operations center miles away, a single alert flashed across encrypted servers. Colonel James Rawdon bent over his console, his jaw tight, his fist curling. The words blinked once on his screen. Iron Wolf protocol reactivated. He whispered something low, almost like a vow. Iron Wolf activated. And without hesitation, he put on his cap and strode from the room. Because whenever that code resurfaced, it meant only one thing. Someone at Fort Redstone had no idea who they were mocking. By morning, the atmosphere on base was different. Not by much, but enough. Jokes were thinner. Conversations carried a nervous edge. The override, the strange code, the disruption, it haunted the cadets. Morgan, of course, brushed it off. Lounging at the podium, he muttered, "Guess our little medic hacked the system for attention." He smirked, though fewer joined his laughter this time. Sarah sat at the rear, posture composed, eyes steady, her hands calm. But Nena saw her right fist clenched against her knee, tight enough her knuckles whitened. Then the lights flickered, once, twice, then the room went black. 7 seconds of silence. When the lights snapped back, the main screen glowed again. No codes this time, no authorization prompts, just a name pulsing across the glass. Colonel James Rawdon, inbound. The sound of boots echoed down the corridor. Heavy, measured, deliberate. The double doors at the far end swung open. A man entered who didn't need to speak to command silence. Colonel James Rawdon. Decorated, hardened, broad-shouldered. His chest carried ribbons and insignia, but it wasn't his uniform that froze the room. It was the weight he carried. The kind that only comes from leading men into places they weren't meant to return from and bringing them home. His eyes swept the room, piercing, sharp, unyielding. Then they locked onto Sarah Whitaker. For the first time since she set foot at Fort Redstone, Sarah moved, not out of fear, not out of shock, but recognition. Rawdon stepped forward. His voice was calm, low, but rolled like thunder. Iron Wolf, stand by. The hall froze. Blake Morgan blinked, confused. Wait, what? Rawdon didn't break eye contact. Sergeant Sarah Whitaker, front and center. Sarah rose, not rushed, not shaken, but with quiet precision. Each step echoed against the floor as she walked the aisle. She stopped before him, her expression unreadable. Rawdon's gaze softened only slightly. Good to see you again, Iron Wolf. Gasps rippled through the room. Cadets stared wide-eyed, mouths parted. Whispers shot through the rows. Morgan leaned back, a smirk flickering back onto his face. This some kind of show, he sneered. She's just a transfer, a medic. Rawdon turned his head, his tone sharp as steel. Lieutenant, his voice cut through the air. At ease, you've said enough. Morgan's smirk faltered. For the first time, he had no reply. Riordan faced the hall again. His voice carried weight, not volume. You think you know who trains beside you. You think rank tells the whole story. He shook his head slowly. You have no idea who she is. The silence thickened. Chairs creaked as cadets straightened. 7 years ago, Riordan continued, a covert team executed an unsanctioned rescue at Dawson Ridge. 12 Marines trapped, extraction failed, mission written off, until one operator, call sign Iron Wolf, led a 4-person squad into hostile ground. No air cover, no reinforcements, no chance. 47 minutes later, every one of those Marines walked free. He paused, his eyes never left Sarah. She commanded that unit. A stunned silence swept the room. Even Morgan, jaw slack, sank back into his seat. She didn't inherit that name, Riordan said, his voice tightening. She carved it. His gaze softened, almost reverent. And she saved my life. Gasps cut through the hall. Nena's chest rose sharply. Morgan's color drained. Riordan stepped closer. His voice dropped, meant for her alone. They see it now, but this isn't about them. Sarah's jaw set. Then who is it about? His expression darkened. Someone's watching this base. Someone who shouldn't be. Sarah's eyes narrowed, her voice low, steady. Then it begins again. Riordan gave a single nod. Welcome back, Iron Wolf. And in that moment, Sarah Whittaker, the medic they mocked, the transfer they dismissed, was no longer a rumor. She was Iron Wolf, and everyone in that hall would never forget it. What if the alarms weren't just alarms? That question struck Sarah before the first siren even finished echoing across the base. Because when danger returns, it never arrives loudly at first. It arrives in flickers, in patterns, in shadows you almost mistake for your own. The night storm hammered Fort Redstone in sheets of rain, drowning the courtyards and rattling the old barracks windows. Cadets stirred in their bunks when the first warning klaxon cut through the air, followed by another, then another. The voice of the automated system cracked overhead. Breach detected, west perimeter, condition red, all personnel to response stations immediately. Sarah's eyes snapped open before the second announcement even finished. Her tablet still glowed faintly beside her bed, those same 4 words frozen on its screen. Iron Wolf, stand by. She didn't waste time asking questions. Boots on, sidearm secured, hair pulled back in one fluid motion. Around her, cadets scrambled, some in panic, some still half asleep, bumping shoulders in the rush of bodies toward the exits. Orders barked through the halls, but none of it felt right. Something inside her, instinct sharpened long before Fort Redstone tightened. In the strategy hall, chaos thickened. Dozens of cadets crowded in, voices clashing, rifles rattling against the walls. Colonel Riordan stood at the center, every order sharp, clipped, precise. Lockdown Alpha, seal the gates, secure the armory. His voice cut through the storm of noise, dragging reluctant discipline back into the room. But then a younger officer, pale-faced, broke through the crowd. Sir, his voice cracked, they're not breaching from outside. The words silenced everything. Even the alarms seemed to dull. Riordan snapped his head toward him. What? The officer swallowed. Internal sensors triggered. Whoever's inside was already here. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The storm outside thundered like a drum, filling the silence left inside. Then Riordan's eyes turned to Sarah. South wing, he ordered. Take Tor's move. No hesitation. Sarah's hand reached for her sidearm, the weight of it familiar, steadying. From the ranks, Nina Tor's, sharp-eyed, still processing the revelation of who Sarah truly was, pushed through to her side. Together, they bolted down the hall, boots pounding against polished tile. The corridors were lit only by emergency strips along the walls, casting everything in pale red. Shadows warped across the ceiling. Their breaths echoed in the narrow space. Sarah's voice was low, controlled. Stay close. Don't question. If you see something move, call it before you fire. Tor's nodded quickly, clutching her weapon tighter. Who do you think it is? Sarah didn't answer, not yet. They reached the junction where the south wing split into maintenance corridors. Sarah slowed, eyes scanning every detail under a microscope. That's when she saw it. A vent panel near the security feed, freshly disturbed, just enough dust displaced to betray a hand. "They've been here," she muttered. Then sound, subtle, almost imperceptible, the scuff of a boot sole against the floor behind them. Sarah spun, weapon leveled. "Step out." From the shadows a figure emerged. Black fatigues, suppressed gear, movements too controlled, too practiced to be cadet level. His rifle gleamed under the dim light, not Marine issue. His mask obscured everything but his eyes. For a fraction of a second he froze, then he lunged. Tors fired first, her shot sparking against the wall as the intruder rolled aside, springing back to his feet with startling speed. He bolted down the corridor, disappearing into the labyrinth of the maintenance wing. "Move," Sarah snapped, sprinting after him. Tors followed, her breath ragged, weapon clutched tight as they barreled through the twisting halls. The chase ended in a sudden stop. Sarah skidded to the end of a corridor, her boots screeching against the tile. Her eyes locked on a device fixed to the main security panel, small, blinking with a steady light. She ripped it free, turning it in her hand. Not foreign tech, not improvised sabotage, but U.S. military issue. Someone inside had authorized this. By dawn, the sirens faded. The infiltrators were gone. No casualties, no stolen weapons, no visible damage, just devices, just questions. Sarah stood in the strategy room with the others, rain dripping from her hair, the device lying on the table before them with a sharp metallic clink. "This wasn't an attack," she said flatly. "They weren't here to destroy anything." Rawdon's face darkened, the lines of his jaw set like stone. "No," he answered quietly. "They were testing us." The weight of his words sank like an anchor into the room. Cadets shifted uneasily. Nobody wanted to ask the question forming in their minds. Testing for what? From the far side of the room, Lieutenant Blake Morgan stepped forward, his usual arrogance stripped bare. His voice trembled slightly, unsure, uncharacteristically small. I didn't know." His eyes flicked toward Sarah, guilt buried beneath disbelief. "All this time Sarah's gaze cut to him, unreadable. Her silence lingered like judgment. Finally, she spoke, calm, deliberate. "Now you do." The words struck harder than any reprimand. Morgan dropped his eyes, his jaw tight. By morning light, the storm had passed. The sky hung heavy with gray clouds, the kind that never quite clear but dragged the day into quiet unease. Sarah stood beneath the awning outside, her eyes fixed on the misty horizon. The call sign buried for years, Iron Wolf, was alive again, and someone out there wanted to see if she had forgotten who she was. They were wrong. Because Sarah Whittaker wasn't at Fort Redstone to fit in. She wasn't there to earn their laughter or fight for their approval. She was there because someone had started a game she had played before and survived. Behind her, Nina Tors stepped into the rain, hesitant at first. "Sergeant," she stopped herself, correcting quietly. "Iron Wolf." Sarah's eyes shifted, but she didn't answer right away. Tors swallowed, pressing on. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" A pause. Sarah's gaze stayed on the horizon, her voice soft but sharp enough to cut. "Because sometimes the more people know, the less they see, and when they stop seeing, people die." Tors said nothing. There was no argument for that, only the humbling weight of realization. Later, inside the operations center, Rawdon studied the device Sarah had ripped from the panel, his expression unreadable. His fingers tapped once against the table before he spoke. "Internal authorization," he muttered. "Someone with clearance helped plant this." He looked up, his eyes like iron. "This wasn't a breach, it was a message." Sarah leaned forward, her tone steady. "And messages are always meant to be read by someone specific." Their eyes locked, the truth unspoken. Whoever had tested the base wasn't finished. That night the cadets moved with a different kind of energy. Their laughter was gone, replaced by whispers, stolen glances towards Sarah, hushed exchanges that ended whenever she entered a room. Respect had replaced ridicule, but respect wasn't enough to erase suspicion. Not yet. In the dim light of the barracks, Sarah sat on the edge of her bunk, her notebook open across her lap again. She flipped through pages filled with her tight handwriting, dates, patterns, flickers of anomalies. She lingered on one page. The coordinates matched with precision to the flickering cameras and the breach point. She circled it twice, her pen digging deeper into the paper. Her gut told her the truth. Fort Redstone wasn't just being tested, it was being mapped. Every weakness cataloged, every delay measured, every response timed. And somewhere, hidden behind the curtain, someone was watching her specifically. The phrase still glowed in her mind. Iron Wolf, stand by. She closed the notebook, slid it under her pillow again, and leaned back. But she didn't sleep. Not really. Sleep had been a stranger to her long before this night. And when dawn came again, the sun broke weakly through the clouds. Sarah Whitaker was already awake, boots laced, eyes sharp. Because whatever game had just begun, she knew it would only escalate. And the question was no longer, why are they testing us? It was, how long until they strike for real? Why would anyone betray their own? That question haunted Sarah long before Fort Redstone, but it pressed harder now as she stared down at the map sprawled across the operations table. 3 red pins marked the areas of the compound that had been tampered with the night before. Each pin, each small detail wasn't random. They were deliberate, calculated. Tors stood beside her, her arms folded tight across her chest. They could have hit the armory, she muttered. They could have gone for the comms hub or even the barracks, but they didn't. They just left these devices. Sarah leaned closer to the map, her finger tracing the perimeter route in silence. Her voice, when it came, was quiet. They weren't here to destroy. They were here to learn. Colonel Rorden stepped forward, his presence filling the space, his tone sharp. And they learned too much. He paused, his gaze heavy. This wasn't a foreign op, not completely. Those devices, military issue. Someone with clearance authorized them, someone inside. The words fell like a stone into deep water. The ripples reached everyone in the room. Cadets shifted uneasily, glancing at each other, each silent thought dangerous. If not me, then who? Sarah remained still, her eyes fixed on the map. Betrayal was something she had seen before. It never came in the open. It crept in, slow, quiet, like rot beneath wood. Later in the training yard, drills resumed, though the energy had changed. Boots struck harder against gravel. Orders rang louder. But discipline wasn't enough to drown the unease. Every cadet stole glances towards Sarah, some with awe, some with guilt, some with suspicion. Morgan kept his distance. For the first time, he had nothing clever to say. Sarah ignored them all. Her movements were precise, exact, but her eyes never rested, always scanning, always measuring. Tors caught up to her afterward, her voice hushed but urgent. "You think it's one of us, don't you?" Sarah didn't slow her pace. "I think someone opened a door that should have stayed shut." Tors hesitated, then pressed. "But why here, why now?" Sarah stopped, turning just enough to meet her eyes. "Because someone remembered Iron Wolf." The word struck Tors silent. She wanted to ask more, but Sarah's expression made clear the subject was closed. That night rain returned, softer than before, a steady whisper against the windows. Sarah sat alone on her bunk, the notebook open again. She flipped through the scrawled entries, her pen tracing connections between patterns no one else had seen. Camera failures, vent tampering, device placement, each small anomaly linked together like a chain. But one detail clawed at her more than the rest, the flicker she had seen on the ridge camera during training. The timing had been perfect, almost surgical. Whoever was behind this wasn't testing the base. They were testing her. Her jaw tightened. She wrote one word at the bottom of the page: "Why?" Sleep never came. By morning, the base gathered in the hall for a full briefing. Riordan stood at the front, his expression grim, his tone unwavering. "We were infiltrated," he said plainly. "Whoever they are, they're disciplined, organized, and they knew exactly where to strike." A murmur rippled through the crowd. He let it pass before continuing. "But this wasn't an assault. It was reconnaissance, which means this was only the beginning." His gaze swept the room, landing finally on Sarah. "From this moment on, training doesn't change, it doubles. Discipline doesn't bend, it hardens. If you think this is just about drills, you're wrong. You're being watched, every second, by them and by me." The silence afterward was absolute. Later, during combat simulations, Sarah's squad moved through a mock urban environment. Walls of plywood, smoke grenades hissing in corners. Cadets shouted commands, covering angles, moving cautiously. But Sarah felt it again, that gnawing unease in her chest. A shadow where none should be. A flicker of movement in her periphery. Her voice cut sharp through the comms. "Hold position." The squad froze. Sarah raised her rifle, scanning the far corner of the simulation course. Nothing moved, no sound, but she knew someone was there. "Who's out there?" she called. Her voice was calm, but her finger tightened against the trigger. "Nothing." Then just for a moment she caught it, the faint reflection of glass, a scope, before it vanished behind cover. Her pulse steadied, not quickened. Whoever was here, they weren't part of the drill. She signaled Tors silently, her hand cutting through the air. Tors nodded, moving low, flanking carefully. But when they reached the corner, the space was empty. Only a single mark on the wall remained. A scratched symbol, faint but deliberate. A wolf's head. Sarah's breath caught, just for a second. The others didn't notice. They filed back into formation, muttering about ghost sightings and nerves. But Sarah pocketed the small scrap of etched metal she found tucked into the corner. Later, alone, she studied it under the light of her bunk lamp. The carving was crude but unmistakable. A wolf's head, teeth bared. Someone was leaving her a message. But who? And why here, in the heart of Fort Redstone? Tors entered quietly, pausing when she saw Sarah with the scrap. That wasn't part of training, was it? Sarah closed her fist around it. No. Tors hesitated, then asked, almost afraid of the answer, "Is it them, from before?" Sarah didn't reply. Her silence was answer enough. Across the base, whispers grew louder. Rumors that Sarah wasn't just a decorated medic or a transfer, but something more. Stories twisted in the retelling. Some claimed she'd single-handedly pulled Marines from impossible missions. Others that she'd gone rogue years before and returned under a new name. Morgan avoided her now, though his pride burned in his eyes whenever she passed. Nina kept watching, careful, studying the way Sarah moved, the way she scanned the world as if waiting for something no one else could see. And all the while the base remained under silent surveillance. Cameras flickered, sensors glitched, not enough to trigger alarms, just enough for Sarah to notice. One night, unable to sit still, she returned to the perimeter fence. The storm clouds swallowed the moon, leaving only the hum of the floodlights. She walked the line slowly, her boots crunching gravel. Then she stopped. A cigarette ember glowed faintly beyond the fence, just inside the tree line. Too steady to be an accident, too deliberate to be a mistake. Her hand tightened around her weapon. She didn't raise it, not yet. The ember dimmed, then vanished. By the time she pushed forward, nothing remained but wet leaves and silence. But she knew. They were out there, watching, waiting, and not for Fort Redstone. For her. What happens when the enemy isn't at the gates, but already inside? That question pressed against Sarah like a weight she couldn't shake. Every corridor, every face, every quiet corner of Fort Redstone seemed to carry it now. The days after the first breach blurred into uneasy repetition. Drills doubled, Schedules stretched. Cadets snapped awake before dawn, pushed harder than ever, their muscles burning, their patience thinning. Yet despite the exhaustion, no one complained, because the silence between them was heavier than the training itself. Someone had let the infiltrators in, and no one knew who. Sarah moved through it all like stone, focused, sharp, but Tors noticed the change in her. She rarely spoke. She lingered in doorways longer, scanning. She studied the cadets with an intensity that made them uneasy. It wasn't paranoia, it was survival. One evening, the briefing hall filled again. Rows of cadets seated as instructors called out tactical adjustments, new perimeter protocols, lockdown rotations. Morgan sat stiffly near the front, his once smug expression replaced with tight-jawed silence. He didn't dare meet Sarah's eyes anymore. The room hummed with low chatter until a sudden crack of static cut across the speakers. The projector flickered, just like before. Everyone froze. Sarah's hand closed around her tablet instinctively. The screen lit on its own. 4 words again. Iron Wolf, stand by. The projector screen went black. Then a symbol bloomed across it in harsh white light. A wolf's head, snarling. Gasps rippled through the hall. Riordan was on his feet instantly, barking orders. Shut it down, kill the feed. The instructors scrambled, pulling power, cutting lines. Nothing worked. The image lingered, stubborn, alive, until finally, just as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished. The silence afterward was suffocating. Riordan's voice boomed through it. Everyone returns to quarters. Now move. Boots thundered against the floor as cadets filed out. Sarah remained seated, her eyes still fixed on the blank screen. Tors lingered beside her, whispering low. That wasn't a breach. That was a message. Sarah closed her tablet with a snap. No, she said, her tone low, deliberate. That was a warning. Later that night, Sarah lay awake again, staring at the ceiling, her muscles aching but her mind sharper than ever. The scrap of metal with the wolf's head sat on her desk, catching faint moonlight. She turned it over in her hand, her breath shallow. Why her? Why now? Why here? Memories pulled at her like undertow. Dawson Ridge, the night that name Iron Wolf was carved in fire and blood. 12 Marines trapped. No air cover. 47 minutes that stretched into eternity. She remembered their faces, their fear. And she remembered the silence that followed when it was done. No medals, no official story, just shadows and scars. And now those shadows had followed her here. The following morning, training resumed under a sky heavy with low clouds. Sarah led her unit through the obstacle course, her movements clean, efficient. But halfway through, a sharp crack echoed across the yard. Not thunder, not a rifle, something else. Cadets hit the ground instinctively, weapons raised. Instructors barked orders, trying to regain control. Sarah's eyes narrowed toward the ridgeline beyond the course. She had heard it before anyone else, the distinct pop of a signal device. She scanned quickly, then spotted it. A flare, faint smoke curling upward in the distance. Eyes up, she shouted. That's not part of training. Riordan's voice rang out over the field seconds later, confirming it. All cadets back inside. Move. Chaos erupted as the yard emptied. Sarah stayed behind, her eyes locked on the flare's smoke trail. She knew exactly what it was, a marker. But for whom? Inside the operations room, the tension broke into arguments. Cadets pointed fingers, demanding answers, some whispering accusations under their breath. Morgan slammed his fist against the table, his frustration spilling out. This is insane. Whoever's behind this is laughing at us while we run around like blind mice. Enough! Riordan's voice cut like a blade. The room silenced instantly. His eyes swept the cadets, lingering on Morgan just long enough to remind him who commanded this base. Then his gaze shifted to Sarah. What do you see? He asked her directly. Sarah studied the map on the wall, the red pin marking where the flare had appeared. Her voice was steady, controlled. They're charting response times. They want to know how fast we move, how far we spread, how disciplined we stay under pressure. Rorden nodded once, agreed. Tors leaned in, whispering urgently to Sarah. But why show us the flare at all? Why not stay hidden? Sarah's answer was colder than she intended, because they wanted me to see it. The room fell still again. Hours later, the base settled into an uneasy calm. Rain began again, faint against the rooftops. Sarah walked the dim corridor toward the barracks when she noticed a figure standing at the far end, half lit in shadow. It was Morgan. For a moment neither spoke, then he stepped forward, his voice tight. "Why you?" Sarah's expression didn't change. "What do you mean?" He gestured sharply, frustration biting at every word. "All of this, the overrides, the messages, the flare, every time it comes back to you. Why, what are you not telling us?" Her silence stretched. Morgan's jaw clenched. "You want us to trust you, but how can we if you won't say anything?" Finally, Sarah answered, her tone even but cutting. "Trust isn't given because you demand it, Lieutenant. It's earned when you stop assuming you know everything." His face hardened, but he didn't argue. He turned on his heel, leaving her alone in the corridor. But his words lingered. Because deep down, Sarah knew he was right. The messages weren't for Fort Redstone. They were for her. And the longer she stayed silent, the more dangerous the game became for everyone. That night, sleep didn't come again. The rain drummed steadily against the windows. The tablet on her desk buzzed once faintly. She hesitated before looking. One new message. No sender, no subject. Just 3 words this time. "You remember us." Her breath caught. Not a question, a statement. Her hands tightened around the tablet until her knuckles whitened. Memories surged again, faces, voices, moments she had locked away. The ridge, the fire, the blood. And the ones who hadn't come back. She shut her eyes, her chest tight. Yes, she remembered. The problem was, so did they. What do you do when the past you buried claws its way back into the present? That was the question Sarah couldn't shake as she sat in silence, the tablet's glow still burning on her desk. You remember us. 3 words, simple but heavy, as if someone had reached inside her chest and squeezed. The rain outside never let up. It fell in steady curtains, washing the courtyard, rattling the barracks' roofs. Sarah sat upright on her bunk, boots still on, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Sleep wasn't possible, not now. At dawn, the base awoke to another storm, not of rain but of rumor. The cadets whispered in tight circles, glancing toward Sarah with eyes that carried something heavier than curiosity now. Fear. Morgan was the loudest voice as usual, though it no longer carried the same swagger. He spoke to a cluster of recruits near the mess hall. You've all seen it. Every time something happens, it ties back to her. The override, the messages, that flare yesterday. She didn't even look surprised. Nena, standing nearby, cut him off sharply. Because she sees things the rest of you miss. Without her, we wouldn't have found those devices. Morgan sneered, though the edge of uncertainty cracked his tone. Or maybe she wanted us to find them. A ripple of unease passed through the group. Sarah entered then, her stride calm, deliberate, tray in hand. The whispers died immediately. Morgan stiffened, his jaw tight, but said nothing. She sat alone, as she always did. Tors joined her after a moment, breaking the silence between them. They're scared, Tors said softly. Sarah didn't look up from her food. Fear makes people talk. Tors hesitated, then pressed. But is he wrong? Sarah finally raised her eyes, steady, unreadable. About what? Tors' voice dropped lower. That all of this is about you. The words lingered between them like smoke. Sarah didn't answer. That evening the base was thrown into chaos again. The alarms blared, red lights strobing across the halls. This time, it wasn't the west perimeter. It wasn't the south wing. It was the armory. Sarah and Tors sprinted through the corridors, weapons drawn, boots pounding against tile. Shouts echoed ahead, cadets rushing, instructors barking orders. When they arrived, the scene froze them. The door to the armory wasn't broken, it wasn't forced, it was unlocked. Riordan stood in the center, his face carved in steel. Who opened this? His voice was low but dangerous. No one answered. The racks inside were untouched. Every rifle, every round accounted for. Yet on the central bench, left deliberately, lay another message. A small piece of metal, engraved with the same snarling wolf's head. Riordan lifted it slowly, turning it over in his hand, his jaw flexed. They're not just inside our walls, they're in our systems. Sarah stepped forward, her voice calm but edged with something deeper. They're baiting us. Why? Tors asked, breathless. Sarah's answer was cold. Because they can. The room fell silent. That night Riordan called her into his office. The space was dim, the storm outside muffled against the thick walls. He stood behind his desk, the wolf's head emblem still in his hand. "You know something," he said, "not a question, a statement." Sarah stood rigid, her hands clasped behind her back. "I know they're not random. Whoever they are, they know me. They want me to see them." Riordan's eyes narrowed. Why? What happened out there at Dawson Ridge that never made the reports? The silence stretched heavy. Sarah's chest tightened. She could feel the ghosts pressing close, waiting for her to speak their names. But she didn't. She couldn't. Finally, she answered, her voice steady but hollow. "Some things aren't written down for a reason." Riordan studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Fair enough. But understand this, Sergeant. If they're after you, they'll come for all of us. Whatever ghosts you brought back, they're here now, and they won't leave quietly." When she returned to the barracks, Tors was waiting. "You didn't tell him everything, did you?" Tors asked softly. Sarah sat heavily on her bunk. "If I told him everything, he wouldn't let me stay." Tors frowned. "Then maybe you should." Sarah's eyes lifted sharp. "No, not yet." Because the truth was a blade, and blades cut anyone who held them. The following days passed in tense silence. Cadets trained harder, their eyes sharper, but the air between them thickened with mistrust. Every flickering light, every strange noise at night felt like another test. And then came the second strike. It was near midnight when the power cut. The barracks plunged into darkness. Cadets stirred, voices rising in confusion. Then shouts, boots pounding, gunfire. Sarah was already moving, weapon in hand, Tors on her heels. They pushed through the dark corridors, the emergency strips casting everything in faint red. In the mess hall, chaos erupted. Smoke grenades hissed, flooding the space with thick gray clouds. Shadows darted between tables, silent, precise. Figures in black fatigues, like before, moving with intent. Cadets scrambled, some firing wildly, others ducking for cover. The infiltrators didn't shoot to kill. Their movements were surgical, their targets specific. Sarah's eyes caught it, a figure attaching another device to the central console. She raised her weapon, firing once. The shot cracked through the smoke. The figure stumbled, then bolted, vanishing into the haze. She lunged forward, ripping the device free. Her stomach sank as she turned it over in her hand. Not explosive, not sabotage. A tracker. They weren't stealing, they were marking. Tors coughed through the smoke, her voice strained. "Why aren't they fighting us?" Sarah's chest tightened. "Because we're not the objective." By the time the smoke cleared, the infiltrators were gone again. No casualties, no stolen weapons, just another device, another message. The cadets gathered in shaken silence, their faces pale, their bodies trembling from adrenaline. Morgan's voice cracked through the quiet, raw with fear this time. "This is insane. They're inside whenever they want and we can't stop them." His eyes darted toward Sarah. "Why you? Why us? What the hell do they want?" Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't. because deep down she already knew. They weren't here for Fort Redstone. They were here for Iron Wolf. How much truth can you bury before it starts to claw its way back out? That question lingered in Sarah's chest long after the smoke cleared from the mess hall. The infiltrators had vanished again. No bodies left behind. No equipment dropped in haste. Just a tracker device still warm in her hand, a cruel reminder that the enemy wasn't here to fight battles, they were here to send messages. To her. The next morning the compound moved like a hive struck by a stick. Cadets rushed between drills. Instructors barked louder than usual. Security doubled along the fences. Yet beneath the noise, fear crackled like static. Tors stuck close to Sarah's side, but even she couldn't ignore it. "They're falling apart," she whispered as they passed a cluster of recruits muttering in low voices. Sarah's eyes didn't shift. They're looking for someone to blame, fear always does. And it didn't take long for that fear to find a target. By afternoon, rumors spread through the ranks like fire through dry grass. Morgan fanned the flames, his voice louder now because desperation sharpened it. "Every breach, every message, every damn symbol, it all points back to her," he hissed to anyone who would listen. "She knows more than she says. She's hiding something. How do we know she's not one of them?" Nena snapped back, her voice cold. "Because she's the only reason we're not already dead." The argument boiled, spilling into the yard until Riordan himself had to break it apart with a roar that silenced the entire formation. But the damage was done. The cadets no longer looked at Sarah with awe or respect. They looked at her with questions they were too afraid to voice. That night Sarah sat on her bunk, the notebook open across her lap. Her hand hovered above the page, but the words wouldn't come. Her mind wasn't on the base anymore. It was back there, Dawson Ridge. The memory dragged her under like a riptide, the smell of cordite, the heat of flames licking through twisted steel. 12 Marines pinned down in a ravine, the air thick with gunfire. No reinforcements, no air cover, just her and 3 others. She remembered the weight of command pressing down on her shoulders, the knowledge that every decision meant life or death. She remembered the face of Corporal Harris, barely 20, looking at her for orders while his leg bled through a makeshift tourniquet. She remembered what it took to get them out. And she remembered who didn't make it back. Her eyes snapped open, her breath shallow. The barracks was quiet around her, cadets asleep in restless silence. Tors stirred across the room, watching her. "You were there again, weren't you?" she whispered. Sarah closed the notebook slowly. "It never leaves." Tors hesitated, then asked, softer this time, "What happened out there?" Sarah's eyes lifted hard. The kind of thing no one writes down, the kind of thing that comes back when you least want it. Tors wanted to ask more, but something in Sarah's tone made her stop. Some truths weren't ready to be spoken. Not yet. 2 nights later, the infiltrators struck again. It began with silence. No alarms, no flashing lights, just the hum of the generators sputtering out one by one until the entire compound sank into blackness. Sarah jolted upright in her bunk, instincts sharper than sleep. "Up," she hissed to Tors. "Now." Before the others stirred, she was already moving, sidearm in hand, boots hitting the floor with steady rhythm. Tors followed close, heart pounding, weapon trembling in her grip. They pushed into the corridor, the emergency lights faintly glowing red along the floor. Shadows stretched long and thin. A sound cut through the dark, a door creaking open somewhere ahead. Sarah raised her weapon, signaling Tors to stay low. Together they advanced, each step careful, each breath controlled. Then a voice, muffled but clear, drifted from the end of the hall. "Move quick, Planet here." Sarah froze, her blood went cold. They weren't targeting the armory this time, or the mess, or the yard. They were inside the communications hub. She bolted forward, bursting through the door. 2 figures in black fatigue spun toward her, shock flashing in their eyes. One dropped a device onto the console, the other reached for his weapon. Sarah fired first. The shot cracked through the room, the muzzle flash illuminating their masks. One figure crumpled, clutching his shoulder. The other bolted toward the rear exit, vanishing into the shadows. Tors rushed in behind her, coughing through the haze of smoke the intruders had left behind. "What is it?" she gasped. Sarah lifted the device from the console, her heart sinking as she recognized it. Not a bomb, not a jammer. A transmitter. Tors frowned. "What's it sending?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "Coordinates." Her stomach churned. They weren't testing anymore. They were guiding something or someone straight here. By the time Riordan arrived with reinforcements, the infiltrators were gone again. The comms hub was intact, but the transmitter had already pulsed once. Too late to know who had received it. Riordan's face darkened as Sarah placed the device in his hand. "They're not just watching us," she said quietly. "They're calling something in." For the first time since this began, Riordan's composure cracked. A shadow crossed his expression, something unspoken but heavy. "Then we're out of time," he muttered. The next day, the base was split down the middle. Half the cadets whispered that Sarah was the only reason they'd survived this long. The other half whispered she was the reason the attacks kept coming. Morgan's voice grew sharper, louder. "We can't keep letting her lead us blind. She's not telling us everything. We deserve to know what we're up against." Nena countered him fiercely, but the cracks were spreading. Lines were being drawn. That evening, Sarah stood alone at the edge of the yard, the rain finally lifting, the horizon painted in muted orange. Tors approached slowly, her footsteps hesitant. "You can't keep it locked inside forever," she said quietly. Sarah's jaw clenched. "The moment I open it, everything changes. They'll stop seeing me as one of them. They'll see me as a ghost." Tors shook her head. "No, they'll see you as what you are, Iron Wolf, and maybe that's exactly what they need right now." Sarah didn't answer, but her silence wasn't disagreement, it was fear. Not of the cadets, not even of the infiltrators. Fear of the memories she'd buried. Because the truth was coming for her, whether she wanted it or not. And when it arrived, it would drag Dawson Ridge back into the light. The next night, the infiltrators set the trap. It began with a flare, bright, sharp, blooming against the ridgeline just beyond the perimeter. Cadets scrambled, rifles raised, boots pounding as alarms wailed through the base. Riordan barked orders, directing squads toward the outer fence. But Sarah didn't move with them. Her gut twisted, screaming at her. This wasn't an attack, it was bait. And if they took it, they'd be walking straight into the wolf's jaws. What if the flare wasn't a signal but a mirror? That thought dug into Sarah's mind as she stood beneath the roar of alarms, the ridgeline burning red in the distance. It wasn't the flare itself that unsettled her. It was the precision, the timing, the way every head snapped toward it like moths to a flame. The cadets charged forward, rifles raised, their movements frantic but eager, desperate to prove they could fight. Orders flew. Riordan's voice thundered over the comms, his tone sharp enough to cut through chaos. "Alpha Squad, East Fence. Bravo, West Perimeter. Move, move, move." Sarah didn't move. Not yet. Her gut twisted. This wasn't an attack. It was choreography. Someone out there was pulling the strings and the cadets were dancing perfectly to the rhythm. Tors noticed her hesitation. "Why aren't you moving?" she hissed, breathless with urgency. "Because they want us to," Sarah answered flatly. Her eyes stayed locked on the flare, her chest tight. "That ridge isn't the fight, it's the bait." Tors frowned, torn between instinct and loyalty. "Then what's the real target?" Sarah's jaw clenched. She didn't know yet, and that was the problem. Minutes later, the yard was nearly empty. Cadets rushed toward the perimeter, their boots echoing into the storm-slick night. Only a skeleton crew remained inside the compound. Sarah's eyes swept the grounds, every detail under scrutiny. The wind, the shadows, the faint hum of power lines. And then she saw it. A figure slipping along the south wing, low to the ground, moving with intent, not toward the flare, away from it. Her pulse sharpened. "South wing," she snapped, already sprinting. Tors followed, her boots striking hard against the tile. They turned the corner and froze. Three figures in black fatigues stood in the corridor, masks obscuring their faces, gear sleek, movements precise. Not cadets, not Marines, operatives. One of them raised a hand, almost casually, before vanishing into the shadows. The other two lunged forward. Sarah didn't think. She fired once, the muzzle flash splitting the dark. Tors dropped low, returning fire, her shots sparking against the walls. The intruders moved like liquid, dodging, rolling, advancing without hesitation. Sarah slammed into one, driving him against the wall, her forearm crushing his throat. His mask cracked under the pressure. For a fleeting second, their eyes locked. And in those eyes, Sarah didn't see rage. She saw recognition. He knew her. She shoved the thought aside, ripping the weapon from his grip and firing into the other figure's shoulder. The man staggered back, clutching his arm, then retreated into the dark with his partner, vanishing as quickly as they appeared. Tors panted, wide-eyed, her weapon trembling in her hands. Why didn't they finish it? They had us cornered. Sarah stared into the dark corridor, her breath steady despite the adrenaline. Because this isn't the fight they came for. They were mapping again, testing, and worse, they wanted her alive. By the time Riordan returned with the perimeter squads, the hall was clear. No intruders. No evidence except for the weapon Sarah had ripped free. A suppressed rifle, scratched and worn, but unmistakably U.S. military issue. Riordan's eyes narrowed as he examined it. His voice was low, dangerous. "This is ours." Sarah said nothing. Her silence was an answer. The cadets gathered later in the hall, their faces pale, their voices sharp with fear. Rumors crackled like sparks. Some swore the intruders weren't outsiders at all, but ghosts from missions no one talked about. Others whispered Sarah's name like a curse, claiming wherever she went, shadows followed. Morgan snapped. His voice rose above the noise, raw, desperate. "This has gone too far. Every time we chase ghosts, more of them show up. And every time she's right there in the middle of it. How do we know she isn't dragging them straight to us?" Nina fired back, her eyes blazing. "Because she's the only one keeping us alive. You think you'd even see them coming without her?" The argument erupted, cadets shouting over one another, their unity fracturing like glass under pressure. Riordan slammed his hand against the table, his voice cracking through the chaos. "Enough." The silence that followed was deafening. His eyes swept the room, his expression hard. "You want someone to blame. Blame the ones who planted military weapons in our own halls. Blame the traitor inside these walls. But you do not point fingers at the only Marine here who's proven herself in blood." His words silenced the cadets, but silence wasn't trust, not anymore. That night Sarah sat alone in the barracks again, the rifle laid across her lap. Her fingers traced the scratches along its stock. Numbers were etched faintly into the side, serials that had been filed off, then carved back crudely. Her chest tightened as she recognized the pattern. Not random, not meaningless. Coordinates. Her pen scrawled them into the notebook, the ink biting deep into the page. She matched them against her earlier entries. Her breath caught. They weren't just random locations. They formed a line, a path. Straight toward Dawson Ridge. Her hands stilled. The ghosts weren't just memories anymore. They were calling her back. Tors entered quietly, her eyes flicking to the weapon in Sarah's lap. "That's not just a rifle, is it?" Sarah closed the notebook slowly, her jaw tight. "No." Tors hesitated, then asked the question that had been growing in the dark corners of her mind. "Who are they?" For a long moment, Sarah didn't answer. The rain outside drummed faintly against the glass. Her chest rose and fell, steady but heavy. Finally she spoke. "They're the ones we left behind." Tor's breath hitched. You mean? Sarah cut her off, her voice sharp, pained. The ones who didn't make it out of Dawson Ridge. The ones who weren't supposed to walk away. Her words hung in the air like ash. Tor's face paled, her voice barely a whisper. But they're dead. Sarah's eyes lifted, sharp as blades. Are they? The silence after that was unbearable. Because Sarah didn't know the answer herself. The next evening the infiltrators struck again. Not with flares, not with smoke, with silence. The base awoke to find every external camera feed looping the same 10 seconds of empty ground. Every perimeter alarm disabled. Every sensor offline. And in the center of the yard, left in plain sight, lay another message. A patch torn, weathered. The Iron Wolf insignia. Cadets whispered in hushed tones, their eyes wide with fear. Rawdon's face hardened as he handed it to Sarah. This is yours, he said quietly. Her hands closed around it, the fabric rough against her skin, memories flooding back like a tide. Dawson Ridge, 12 Marines, 47 minutes, the ones who didn't return. The patch trembled in her hand. They were calling her back. And this time, she knew the trap wasn't for Fort Redstone. It was for her. What happens when the ghosts you carry stop whispering and start calling your name? That question echoed in Sarah's chest as she stared down at the patch lying in her hand. Iron Wolf. Weathered, frayed, torn. A relic of a unit that was supposed to be buried in silence. The cadets stood in uneasy silence around the yard, their faces pale in the morning light. None of them spoke, but their eyes said everything. This wasn't training anymore. This was something else, something they didn't understand. Rawdon broke the silence, his voice steady, though a shadow lingered in his tone. They've stopped hiding. Whoever's behind this, they want you, Sergeant. Sarah closed her fist around the patch, her jaw tightened. They've always wanted me. Morgan scoffed from the back, though the edge of his voice was fear, not arrogance. And we're supposed to just stand here while they drag us into her personal war. Nina snapped toward him. It's not just her war. They're in our house now. You think stepping aside will save you. The words cut the air, but the truth was heavier than argument. Because Sarah knew this was Fort Redstone's fight, not really. It was hers. That night she didn't sleep. She stood at the edge of the yard, the mist curling low across the ground, the horizon swallowed in darkness. Tors joined her quietly, her voice low. They're coming again, aren't they? Sarah nodded once, and this time they won't vanish. Tors hesitated, then asked the question she'd been circling for days. What happened at Dawson Ridge? Sarah's chest tightened. She wanted to bury it again, to lock it away in silence. But the ghosts were already here. She drew a breath. We were sent in after 12 Marines pinned in a ravine. No air support, no backup, just us, a 4-person squad. We got them out, every single one, but not everyone walked away. Her eyes darkened. 2 of mine didn't make it back. Harris, Lane, they covered the retreat. They should have been remembered as heroes. Instead, they were erased, buried under reports that never saw daylight. And when I wore the name Iron Wolf, it wasn't a title. It was a reminder of what I lost. Tor's throat tightened, her voice soft. And now? Sarah's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon. Now someone's wearing their ghosts like a mask. The words lingered, heavy, unyielding. Hours later it began. The alarms never sounded. The cameras never flickered. The infiltrators didn't creep this time. They came in bold, deliberate. Figures in black poured into the yard under cover of darkness, their movements disciplined, their weapons suppressed. Cadets scrambled awake, shouting, firing blindly into the shadows. Chaos erupted, but this time the infiltrators didn't retreat. They pressed inward, toward the barracks, toward her. Sarah grabbed her rifle, her movements fluid, precise. Tors was already beside her, wide-eyed but steady. They're not here for the base, Sarah said, her tone flat, cold. They're here for me. She pushed into the yard, the mist curling around her boots. The infiltrators moved like wolves circling prey, their eyes never leaving her. Then one stepped forward. His mask was gone, his face revealed in the faint light. Sarah's breath caught. It was Harris. Her knees almost buckled, the boy she remembered bleeding through a tourniquet at Dawson Ridge, the Marine she buried in silence, his face pale, eyes sharp but alive. No, not alive, changed. Harris, her voice cracked low, almost a whisper. His expression was unreadable. You left us. The words struck harder than any bullet. Sarah's chest heaved. No, I carried you, both of you, every day since. His jaw tightened. Then carry this. He raised his weapon. The world blurred into motion. Gunfire cracked. Cadets shouted. Smoke rolled across the yard. But Sarah didn't move for cover. Her eyes locked on Harris, her chest torn between the soldier she was and the ghosts clawing back to life. Tors dragged her low, firing into the advancing shadows. Move, she shouted. They'll cut us down. But Sarah's hands shook, her rifle heavy. She saw Harris's face, Lane's voice echoing behind him. The ghost she swore she carried now staring at her with flesh and bone. And in that moment, she realized the truth. These weren't her Marines. They weren't Harris or Lane. They were masks, weapons shaped from memory. Someone had taken their names, their faces, their stories, and turned them into a blade against her. Her breath steadied, her hands stopped trembling. She raised her rifle. The figure wearing Harris's face faltered as her eyes hardened. You're not him, she said, her voice low, unshakable, because he died with honor, and honor doesn't wear a mask. Her shot cracked through the night. The figure stumbled, dropped, and the mask clattered free, revealing an unfamiliar man beneath. The spell broke. The cadets rallied, their fire sharper, their formation tighter. Tors pulled Sarah back into cover, her eyes wide with shock but blazing with something fiercer now. Belief. The infiltrators began to falter, their precision unraveling under the weight of resistance they hadn't expected. Rawdon's voice cut through the chaos, his orders sharp, driving the cadets into cohesion. Within minutes, the yard shifted. The wolves became the hunted. The infiltrators retreated, slipping back into the night, their devices abandoned, their message sent. Silence followed, heavy, crushing. Bodies lay across the yard, some cadets wounded, some infiltrators down. The smoke lingered, curling upward like ghosts. Sarah stood in the center, her chest heaving, her rifle heavy in her hands. The patch of iron wolf still burned in her pocket. Rawdon approached, his expression unreadable, his voice low. It's over for now. Sarah shook her head. No, this was never about the base, it was about me. It always was. The cadets gathered slowly, their eyes no longer filled with doubt but something else. Understanding, respect, a weight that came not from legend but from what they had seen with their own eyes. Morgan stepped forward, his face pale, his voice quiet. I was wrong. Sarah looked at him, unreadable. You were loud, she corrected. Wrong and loud are the same thing in war. He lowered his head, saying nothing more. Tors approached, her face streaked with sweat and ash. So what now? Sarah's gaze lifted toward the horizon, the mist slowly parting. Now we wait, because they'll come again, not for the base, not for the cadets, for Iron Wolf. Her hand brushed the patch in her pocket, a reminder, a wound, a vow. She turned, her voice steady, quiet, but carrying through the silence. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The words lingered, heavy as stone, soft as breath. And as the cadets stood in silence, the dawn broke weakly over Fort Redstone, painting the battered yard in pale light. Sarah Whitaker, once mocked, dismissed, ignored, now stood unshaken. Iron Wolf. Not because she wanted the name, but because it had never stopped being hers.